What's up everyone, Adrian here, and in this video, this is going to be the start of a brand new series that I've been meaning to push out for quite a while, and I'm very excited to share for as we head into the new year, and that is going to be a how to edit in Lightroom series. Now this series stems from a couple different places. One, largely in part due to when I started out in photography as well as editing. I definitely was not the best at taking photos, and when it came to post-editing, I felt like that was a bit more of a challenge for me because I didn't have a firmer understanding of the tool than I have now, and plus I didn't feel like I had a concrete understanding of like what my style is or what I wanted the end goal of an image to be, which made just fumbling through Lightroom a little bit more challenging than it is. But fast forward to now, and after a lot of trial and error as well as a lot of photos taken along the way, I have a firmer understanding of who I am as a person and what my taste and style is, but also just a firmer understanding of like how to manipulate the tools in Lightroom to produce a final image that is within my mind's eye. Now my goal with this series is to share onto you guys some of the tips, tricks, and the ways that I edit in my workflow and the best practices that go along with it. And that includes like not only the how of how I'm using certain tools, but more importantly, like what is the why behind the decision making of like why I'm going about making certain edits to this image to create something in a way the greater picture. Additionally, I would want you to also take away some of the photo concepts I'm going to be talking about, as well as the style concepts I'm going to be talking about within each image as I'm going through each different video, because I feel like by having the concept or angle in mind, that just helps paint the clearer picture of like what it is that we're working towards to, and then reverse engineering using the tools within Lightroom to help produce that current style or look. So with all that in mind, I would also definitely check out the style photography video that I have posted earlier on, where I feel like that video helps lay down the foundation of what resources that I use to define my style, but also what you can expect later on as I'm like looking through photos out there in the field, and also like what it is that I'm editing for within the different styles of my photography as well. So with that in mind, without further ado, let's go ahead and hop right into Lightroom and I'll catch you guys there. Alrighty, so we are in Lightroom right now, and here I have a portrait of Arjun, which if you haven't seen him already, he has been part of my many photos and adventures along the way. And this photo that I'm going to be editing right here is going to be derived from one of my favorite YouTube channels, and that being 90s Neon Soul. So if you're not familiar with them, I'll go ahead and drop a link to their channel in the description below. But what I love about their music is that they have a lot of retro 90s vintage Japanese pop bangers that I definitely play while I am editing for long periods of time. So I'll just have that running on in the background for about like an hour, maybe even 3 hours at a time, depending on how deep of a session I'm getting into. Something that always draws me back in addition to their music is going to be their thumbnails, because each thumbnail is representative of a different city or prefecture in Japan, and it showcases a portrait of a very beautiful lady, but edited in style where it does seem like it's prior to like the year 2000. So definitely more of like a 90s or even 80s kind of vibe, depending on what they're going for and what they're looking at. So this right here, I have a portrait of Arjun. This was shot on the Canon R8, and I was using the Canon EF 50mm lens. I love that lens for a lot of different reasons. Not only is it really cheap, it's compatible with both my full frame, my RF lens, as well as my EF mounted lenses, but I like going for a certain kind of look that I feel like I can't get in some of my other lenses, particularly the Canon RF series. I feel like with the EF mounted f1.8 50mm lens, I can go for something where it's not really all that perfect and tack sharp, which I am trying to go for that little bit of a softer look, because that's something that is a look that's prevalent within some of the thumbnails within 90s Neon Soul. So I've already did a little bit of editing, just retouched the photo a little bit. Now I want to get into really the meat and potatoes of like how and why I do things. Now I've set up my Lightroom in such a way that works with me. If you want to go ahead and set it up your way, you totally can. So I'm going to hit I over here, and as you can see in the left hand corner, it is going to show us our settings. So it's shot 1/60, as well as we're shooting wide open at f1.8, so that way we can go ahead and get as much light in as possible. And we are shooting at ISO 1250. So I'm shooting at higher ISOs because by all means it is a relatively dark scene, and luckily I had some light source coming in from the right hand side of the portrait, so that way it can light up the right hand side of his face and not getting any harsh shadows whatsoever. 50mm lens is what I find to be a really good lens for portraits, among other things, because if I have a 35, I feel like I'm not bringing in the background closer to the forefront, closer to my subject as I want it to. and if I go with an 85, I have to step really far back to get a certain kind of look, because if you're not familiar with using that lens or have a lens that is like telephoto or has a 70mm capacity to it, you will need to zoom in with your feet. So I find that a 50mm is a really good middle ground between both those lenses. And this was shot in Christmas in the Park in San Jose. So for all my South Bay people out there, raise your hand. Now with this photo in particular, I like to go with just I like to crop it later on. So that way I can see like what it is I'm editing. I've also framed it in such a way where his head is in between both these trees, so that way it makes a really nice V shape. Additionally, because we're shooting wide open as well, we have really nice bokeh in mind, and we have a nice contrast between different kinds of colors. So we have a kind of like warmish tone on the right hand side of our model, as well as some colorful and like cooler tones mixed in with some of the more warmer tones from the bokeh and on the left hand side. So with all this in mind, the way that I shot this was a torso upper body shot, and I really wanted to focus on getting that glimmer in his eye. See that shine right over there, because I feel like when it comes to portraits, the first thing you're going to notice right away is a person's eye. As I'm going through these modules, I set it up in such a way that I have my basic exposure panel first and foremost, because I want to get my exposure right after post. And then after that, I have color calibration way up top before setting up my colors, so that way I can go ahead and revert to things in a base color. And then from there, I like to make my colors either homogeneous with each other or somewhat distinct from each other, depending on what I'm going for based on my HSL. And then I have split toning at the end of it, so that way I can go ahead and like kind of finalize or get close to a final look. And then from there, it's just adding on little extra details here and there with different kinds of like effects and transformation sliders. But yeah, let's go ahead and hop right into it. Now, the way that I like to edit in particular is I need to get my exposure and white balance down. Granted, I can go ahead and do that in camera, but I find that easier to just deal with in the Lightroom itself. So when I started out editing, I definitely had a lot of time or struggled with trying to use the white balance, so that way I can get my skin tones right as well as the colors right. What I like to do at times is I like to go ahead and take my color picker, find something that is white, and just start picking ahead and going for different samples. So as we can see, it's definitely too cold. I picked this white picket fence over here, and it looks pretty nice so far. Actually, I wouldn't mind going for that kind of look. We are definitely going a little bit colder than what the white balance on the camera suggested. I'll pick over here too, but once I get into a nice little spot where I feel like it's okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start working with that. So I actually really like using the white picket fence as my North Star in a way, and I think I liked how I had it in the beginning first. So right here is a really good white balance, I think. Now when we're going for this kind of 90s neon soul kind of look, we are going to go for something a little bit more poppy with color and like low contrast in terms of tonal contrast. Now, and speaking of contrast, we are going to get to that later, but I want to get into my exposure first. I want to raise it by half a stop a little bit, so that way I can go ahead and see what I'm going for. At the same time, as we can see, it does go ahead and increase a little bit of the highlights as well as the exposure. I think 0.5 is going to be good enough. I don't want to go a little bit further. And so with that in mind, I want to go ahead and drop my highlights a little bit because I want to have it a little bit flatter, and I think -40 would be good. Now, I tend to edit in terms of 5s, 10s, and sometimes in just numbers in between those, kind of like multiples, because I find that for me at least, going by 10s, 5s, gives me a really good baseline of like where I want to go ahead and take the photo, and then if I want to dial it in, I can definitely do that. So -40 works really well with me. Shadows, I think that we can go ahead and raise it just a tad bit, so that way we can see the detail under the eyes. And then as for the whites, I think that we can go ahead and decrease them just a tad bit, so that way we can get more of like a shiny kind of look. As for the shiny kind of look, we'll go ahead and apply that later on. As for the blacks, I think we are good with where the blacks are at right now. As we can see in the histogram, we have a lot of information in the shadows and blacks area, and our blacks are clipped. I'm not going to worry about that so far because there are other things I'm going to be doing within the edit later on to help me achieve a certain kind of look. Now, to get the shine as well as the matte kind of look that you see within the Neon 90s Soul thumbnails, I like to go ahead and lift up my blacks over here by taking this point on the tone curve and lifting that up. That will lift up everything and provide a nice little fade to it all and provide like a nice little matte shine. As for the counterpart to it, what I like to do is that I don't want to have my whites and my highlights like really blown out. So I'll take the opposite corner and go ahead and reduce that, so that way I can get more of a flatter kind of look to it. Now this right here is the start of where now I can make my adjustments in between the tone curve. I like to go for a simple S curve going in between the shadows, the mid-tones, as well as the highlights over here. And then I like to go ahead and adjust them how I please. So I'll go ahead and bring down the shadows just a little bit more. And then I'll go ahead and bring up the mid-tones just down a little bit, so that way I can still achieve a little bit of a flatter look. And then as for the highlights themselves, I'll go ahead and decrease that as well. So as I'm decreasing these values, what I like to do is that when I'm holding onto a certain point on the tone curve, I like to go ahead and hold shift, so that way I can just go ahead and whoops, Command Z that. I like to go ahead and hold shift and just press up and down on the tone curve, so that way I can just go ahead and apply it vertically, and that way my cursor isn't going all over the place. Now I'm going to lift this point up a little bit more. My mouse is acting a little bit finicky this time around, because I want a little bit more of a shine and a fade to it, and I think that looks really good to me. As for this curve over here, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and lift it up just a tad. And then as for the highlights, I'm going to add a little bit more contrast, so that way I can get a little bit of pop within the lighting that's hitting on the cheek itself. And I think that's a good starting point to where we're at right now. In terms of presence, texture, clarity, dehaze, we're going to go ahead and adjust that for later on. Now I'm going to go into the parametric curve over here. And the reason why I want to go into the parametric curve is because I still want to achieve that nice soft look to it. And there's going to be a couple things I'm going to be adjusting. That being the middle point. That way I can go ahead and get a little bit of a softer look. It's going to underexpose the image just a little bit, but that's totally okay, because we're going to compensate and go ahead and touch up on the highlights. I'm going to go ahead and decrease that just a tad as well, so that way we can still go for that dull, flat look, but we are going to go ahead and compensate with a little bit of color here and there. And then I'm going to lift up the shadows ever so slightly with the bottom left corner over there. So we've already made a lot of adjustments so far to this picture, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the backslash key right over here on my keyboard. And as you can see, we have changed it up quite a bit. I have done some retouching to it, as you can see. Additionally, we have cooled down the image a little bit more. Now, a big portion of this panel over here, we're just going to set this as a baseline. This isn't going to be set in stone, because as we adjust other things, we are going to be referring back to the exposure panel later on, as well as a parametric, as well as the tone curve itself too. Now, this is really important in my workflow, color calibration. I've used color calibration more often in Lightroom Classic than I do in regular Lightroom, because I find that having more control of my colors is very important to me. Now, when it comes to color calibration, you can achieve a baseline color with certain kind of colors, as well as just bring out, I'd say, more color contrast or like unique colors that you can then activate more in the color mixer later on. What I like to do, especially when it comes to like brown skin tones, is go ahead and start adjusting the hues first, followed by the saturation. I'll get into that a little bit later why, as I continue to edit through it. Now, when it comes to calibrating colors, this isn't going to be a full-blown tutorial about color calibration, but what I want you to take away from it is that, and as you're playing with these yourself, play around with the hue. Go ahead and take it and swing it all the way to the left and swing it all to the right, so that way you can get a sense of like see what kind of colors that you're getting out of each direction. Now, what makes sense to me in this photo is I like to push the colors a little bit more toward the orange sides, because I feel like that's a little bit more accurate with the skin tones itself. I'm going to set it at 5 for now, because I think that's going to be a good baseline for the rest of colors to follow. Then I'm going to take my green hue and I'm going to push it over a little bit left and right. And I see that I think I like going towards the right hand side a little bit more. I think that makes a little bit more sense, because now it goes to it works really well with his skin tones itself. Now, as for the blue primary, I feel like this is where a lot of magic can be made of, and this is how you can get more of like an orange and teal kind of look. And we'll go ahead and adjust for those later on. So going with the blue primary, what I like to do is shift it over to the left, and I feel like that also brings out the orange tones within his skin, as well as bring out a little bit more color within the kind of like blue muted tones within the lights, as well as a scarf itself. So as we can see by pressing the backslash key, before and after, I think we have a good baseline with how I want the colors to be at. Now it's just a matter of like adding more saturation, and in terms of saturation, it's going to be targeting the colors particular to that kind of hue or like range of colors, and we'll go ahead and adjust each color individually later on as well. So as I'll take the saturation, I like to go ahead and bump it up a little bit more. I think 5 is going to be good because bumping up either saturation or even the hues for these kinds of colors within the calibration panel, they are quite strong, and we're going to go ahead and adjust for them later on. So I think with how I want to navigate with these colors, I don't want to go with something too saturated because I feel like that's too poppy. So I'm going to tone it down a little bit by compensating some of my saturation panels here and there. As for the blue tones itself, I do want to go ahead and push those out quite a little bit within the blue primary calibration, and I think 5 is going to work really well. Now there are other photos I'm going to be showing later on in different series how I use the primaries in different situations, but at least for here and what we're going for, I think staying within a nice range of 5 or even 10s is going to be a really good starting point for photographers who want a little bit more of a subtle look, or beginner photographers who are just trying to get their understanding down of the calibration panel itself. So now that we're in a good spot where I think that we can go ahead and start working on the colors, hue and saturation and luminance, I like to go ahead and homogenize the colors too, so that way we have, I would say, a much simpler color palette to work with, because by all means simple is going to be much more effective, at least in my philosophy of editing. I'm going to take the red primary and push it out a little bit over to the left hand side because I really want to go ahead and push out those colors in the scarf itself because I think they're really nice. And I feel like it does contrast really well with some of the cooler tones within the image itself. As for the oranges, I feel like pushing them out a little bit to the yellow is okay, because now we're going to take the yellow slider and push it out to the left, so that way it kind of goes in between. Well, we can go about it in a couple of different ways. I like to go ahead and push the yellow slider a little bit towards the orange side because I want to homogenize it with the skin tones. That does make the trees in the background a bit more orange and warmer, which I'm totally fine with because really the focus of our subject is going to be Arjun himself because he's an amazing model. As for this, in terms of the greens, we're going to go ahead and adjust for that in the background as well, so we can go ahead and push them out even more green than what they are currently. Now, because of how the lighting is in my room as well as how the MacBook is rendering the colors, it might not see that as faithfully as me just like editing them in person right now, but I think 40 or 45 is going to be good for where we're at. Now, as for aqua and blues, this is some of my favorite colors, as well as purple to edit for, because I really like to see a lot of magic being made here. I like to push my blues my teals a little bit more towards the blues, because I think they contrast really well with yellows and oranges. As well as the blues, I kind of meet a little bit towards the aquas themselves, so that way I can get a nice homogeneous color scheme going on between those like blue tones as well. Now, purples here are really important, and this is something that I didn't find out until like much later on in my editing, is that sometimes, depending on like where you're shooting and how you're shooting it, purple can be registered as blue and blue be registered as purple. So I like to find that I like to push my purples a little bit more towards the blues. Now, it's not as noticeable in this case, which is totally fine, but I still like to do it anyways because it gives me at least some peace of mind knowing that like, hey, I'm having my colors be as matched up as possible. Now, I like to go between saturation and luminance quite a bit. In this case, I like to go with luminance before going in saturation, depending on the photo and the mood. But here with luminance, the reason why I'm going for luminance first is so that way I can go ahead and make sure that I have certain colors pop out, as well as just have other colors contrast with each other. So that way they're either, say, more poppy or they're less of an importance within the overall scheme itself. I think the first place I want to start off with is going to be red itself, so that way I can reintroduce some really nice rich color into the red scarf, and I really like how that's going so far. As for the oranges and yellows, I will mention, can be found commonly within darker skin tones, but I find oranges tend to be more within darker skin tones itself. I'm going to go ahead and raise the oranges just ever so slightly by 5 because a couple of reasons. It does affect the highlights a little bit, as well as just the orange undertones within the skin, and I don't want to go too crazy with it because as you're editing for different colors, by desaturating or dropping the luminance of one color, you might it also plays into a fine balancing act where some colors might be more saturated or tend to be more saturated or brighter or darker because now other things are kind of compensating for each other. So as for the yellows, I like to go ahead and I would say, ooh, I kind of like how they're both going up and down. Up and down. But I'd say I like to go ahead and drop the luminance in my yellows, so that way I can tend to focus more a little bit on my subject itself, and that brings out a little bit more yellows within the highlights from his facial features, as well as dropping the bokeh brightness in the background, because I feel like when it comes to the background, it should help provide context within the scene. At the same time, it shouldn't be overpowering what we're really focusing on. As for the greens themselves, I like to go ahead and they're not really affecting it too much in this scene at least, but I'll go ahead and drop it a little bit so that way we can still give more importance to our main subject. As for the blues and the aquas, we have a lot of blues going on. Particularly within the left-hand side of the frame, as well as within the blues hidden within the white picket fence over here. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that to add a little bit more contrast to the scene as well. As for my aquas, I'm going to do the same thing as well and drop that by 10. Now from here, I like to play with saturation because I feel like purple and magenta aren't going to be as prominent within the scene itself. Now with saturation, we are targeting certain colors, and we are going to be globally editing the colors as well using the saturation and vibrance later on. But here, I kind of want to play onto that really warm theme of red and add a little bit more saturation, a little bit more pop to the scarf itself, as well as to our... Some reds can be found within the facial features of a subject, depending on, like, you know, how it's shot or just like how the subject looks. Especially reds can be found within the most prominent facial feature, that being the lips themselves, but because they are a little bit underexposed, they aren't going to be as prominent. But playing on the reds, I think that adding more saturation to the red scarf is a really good start. As for saturation when it comes with oranges, I don't want to go crazy with the oranges because now we have very much saturated tones within the skin. I like to go with something a little bit more reserved and go with something like -5 or even -10, depending on if it was like a brighter day, or in this case it's more of a darker scene. As for the yellows, we are going to do very much the same, and I'm going to go ahead and desaturate the yellow just a little bit, more so this time heavily than the oranges, because we have more yellows coming in the scene overall. As we can see here within our histogram, we have yellows prominent, and they're being made by a combination of colors. So by having more focus on my subject itself, I can go ahead and keep him as my focal point. As for greens and aquas and blues, let's go ahead and also knock those down quite a bit as well. I like to go -11. Let's go -11. Aquas, we went -10. As blues, we're going -10 as well. Now with the blues, we can go a little bit crazy here, and I'm going to show you something really cool. Now when it comes to desaturating the blues, we can go really heavy with desaturating the blues and just really make certain colors pop even more so than others. So as we can see, we're kind of reverting blue, not necessarily to a white, but more like white-esque, and that helps bring out more colors within different parts of the frame. Now, because I want to have some bit of color contrast within it, and I feel like blue is a nice festive color, we can go ahead and keep and retain some of the blues within the frame as well. I'm not going to go too crazy with it, but I think kind of -30, -35 is going to be a really good baseline, because that helps us recover more color within the white picket fence, and they're not what I find white to do at times is reflect other colors that are bouncing off of it. So if blue is bouncing off of it, it's going to reflect blue much more heavily, whereas in other colors, if it bounces a little more yellow or orange, then it will go ahead and reflect those colors as well too, and kind of in a way take on that persona in a little bit. Before I get deeper into the edit, I want to go into my backslash arrow right here, or backslash key, and see how far we've come. So as you can see, by going back and forth between the frame, I have a kind of really punchy, underexposed image that's a little bit on the warmer side. So when I go ahead and edit and see my progress, I find that we have flattened out the image a little bit, lifted up the shadows to reveal a little bit more of the detail, while still keeping respect to the highlights themselves and giving that a little bit more of a shine as well too, without it being too punchy and dramatic. And we have homogenized the colors in a way where now I feel like they're working in harmony with each other, and that they are taking on personas similar to each other. The warmer tones are staying with the warmer tones, and the cooler tones are staying with the cooler tones. So now that we have established this far into our editing, we are pretty deep into the edit itself. But what I like to do in terms of really setting not really a final to the colors, but just add a really nice touch to it, kind of like a cherry on top without the whipped cream in a way. is work on shadows, highlights, as midtones. I like to go with more of a global view on it, and after editing for so long, I find that going for accentuating different tones within different parts of the frame is going to be really important. So what I find that when it comes to the midtones, that's the areas between the blacks as well as the whites, highlights, and the shadows. So midtones you can define as the tones within in between those spaces. So I find that there's a good amount of orange tones, and I feel like it's still a little bit cool for my liking. We're gonna go ahead and adjust for that. As for the shadows, we're gonna cool them off a little bit, so that way we can go ahead and add a little bit of like a colder kind of feel to the image. As for highlights, I think I'm gonna keep them with where they're at right now. In terms of the midtones, what I tend to find is the ranges between like 40 as well as 50 tend to be really good. I kind of like to go in between 5s because going in between like 41, 42, 43 is too specific for me, and I just find that like going 5s and 10s are just really easy. 45 I think is a really nice, I wouldn't say like gold tone, but tone that's like bordering between yellow as well as orange. So I set it to that, and I'm holding down shift so that way it draws up this line, and I can go ahead and whoops, LOL, 45. I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit warmth. Now as you can see, it goes really crazy, but that's totally okay. I think subtlety is a really good, is the key here. So I'm gonna go for a little bit of a 5 to help warm up the image. Now to counteract the warmth that we've added to, in a way, mainly the midtones, but also the whole image itself, I'm gonna go ahead and play with my shadows as well, so that way it contrasts really well with the orange tones that we've inserted. I find the ranges between 210 and 225 work really well. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more color in that respect. I think 10 is going to work really well, or even 9, or even 11. Let's go with 11. And then I like to go ahead and scrub back and forth and see how my shadows are being affected. I think going into the cyans is not going to work too well because I feel like that kind of messes up the color palette. Going deeper into the blues and heading into the violets is a bit too much, so I think 215 would actually work really well with this image. As for the shadows, if I need to have more of a finer like adjustment to it, then I'll dive deeper into that. So this right here, I think I will go ahead and add a little bit more chilliness to the shadows. I think minus 15 is actually going to work really well, or minus 16. That's totally alright with where we're at. So in a way, with split toning, what I like to do is that once I've like to create a baseline for my colors, make the colors individual using HSL, or make them homogeneous with each other using HSL, I like to add split toning as, in a way, that cherry on top, so that way I can go ahead and go for that specific kind of look, because when we're going for a neon 90s soul kind of look, I find that having really cool tones is really key, especially with their winter series right now, and then going with the warmer tones helps bring out more of the color and pop within the skin itself. So by all means, we have done a lot to color, and we're going to do a little bit more too. As for some of these finer details over here, I don't really worry about sharpening too much. I don't want to sharpen it because I just feel like it's not necessary, and I feel like minus 40 is a good setup with where it's at. As for the upright, we're not going to worry about that too much right now. It will be posted up to Instagram later on, which if you haven't followed me already, check out Kuya_Adrian, as I'm going to be showing more photo and editing tips, as well as just photos from my travels later on. Now, this is where I find a little bit more of the magic, and now we're adding more layers to the cake, I like to say. Highlights. So as you can see, we have our subject here, center frame, really easy portrait to understand, but I like to add some highlights so that way we can go ahead and focus more on him. I like to go with a little bit of a heavier vignette, so that way we can just really focus on removing some of the distractions, as well as just focus on really the center portion, and that being the eye within that's glistening right over there. So with that in mind, we have reduce the highlights in the corner to help focus our eyes on our subject. And I love to add grain to this too. When it comes to the grain, now I find that going for like a pre-2000s kind of look, or even a vintage film kind of look, I think you definitely need to add grain to it. As for the size and roughness to it, it really depends on like what you're going for. I like to have my images sometimes be really rough, or have a lot of grain to make up for it. And what I find that by adding grain is that it helps flatten out the image, and not, in a way, not necessarily remove contrast, but it doesn't really make it as poppy or punchy in like terms of like a tonal kind of sense. As we can see here, as we're doing this, there's a couple other things that I want to go refer back to, and that being the presence tab in particular. What I like to do is that because we're shooting for a little bit of a softer look and I'm using a 50mm lens, which isn't as sharp as some of my other RF lenses, I like to go ahead and reduce the clarity itself as well. That also helps smooth out the skin tones. I say that going for like a -20, -30 is like, I'd say, a sweet spot for my work. And as you can see now, we have a little bit more, I'd say, less contrast going on. As for the dehaze, I think that we can go with something a little bit hazier. I think -5 works really well. In certain situations, I might go even crazier or even dehaze it to add more dehaze instead of subtracting it. But I think this is good for what it is. And now from here, what I like to do is that now that I have my colors where I want it to be at least for a good baseline, I like to go ahead and adjust for the vibrance and saturation panel itself too. So what I like to do, for the most part, is bring out more colors within the midtones and then bring out and desaturate everything, so that way I can just focus on bringing out more color, pop, and contrast with saturation. And I find that by adding more vibrance and toning it down with saturation really helps in balancing the colors. So what I like to do is that I like to go ahead and adjust my vibrance first, see where that takes me. I don't want to go minus vibrance because I want to have more warmth within the skin tones itself. I think going 20-30 is actually going to be really, I'd say, a little bit too much for me. I like to scale it back and play a little bit more reserve. I think 25 is going to work really well. And then as for saturation, I'm going to go ahead and reduce that ever so slightly by a 5. So that way I can go ahead and just focus on the mid-tone colors in particular. And vibrance and saturation is going to be more of a global kind of adjustment overall. Now, with where we're at right here, I think that we're really good. We're pretty solid. There's a couple other things that I want to do in addition to doing the edit here. I find that the shadows and the blacks are a little bit too dark for my liking, so I might go ahead and reduce the contrast a little bit more to taste, so that way I can bring out a little more detail within those darker tones. I think -10 would be actually pretty good for this scenario. And then lift up the blacks ever so slightly, so that way I can reveal a little bit more detail. And I think increasing the exposure a little bit more is actually going to be very beneficial for this kind of edit. So adding 15 to 0.65 is actually, I think, a good stop right over here. So with that in mind, here is the after, here is the before. And we have done quite a bit to this image, and I really like this a lot so far. So now that we have edited the image, hope you guys liked that a lot. And this is only going to be the first start of a series of more as we develop more into this series. But I find that this is something that I really like, not only in terms of music, but also just like the visual aesthetic of it, but something that I like to reflect with my editing too. And so I would say what to take away from this edit is shoot for the edit at times, because unless you have a really good camera that can, I don't know, like edit for you, which is totally not the case. I think what's important here is having vision and having in your mind's eye what it is that you're achieving for within your final product. So that way you can have a North Star or even a reference if you're using some kind of outside resource to see how you want to go about the edit itself. So with all this in mind, we've definitely achieved just that. We went for a kind of like pre-2000s look to it. We've added a lot more color to the skin tones as well as the surrounding area to help support the focal point of the subject. And we have added color in ways that work with each other as well as retain some sense of like individuality to add a little bit more flair and characteristic to the overall image itself. But if you guys like that video and if you want to see more of these, definitely drop a like and let me know what kind of editing styles that you want to see more out of this channel. I do have some other video ideas in mind, but it's always great to hear like what people are interested in, how they want to take their editing. So with that in mind, hope you guys enjoy. And again, if you haven't seen the style of the video, go ahead and give it a check out, and I'll drop that in the end card over here. So with that in mind, catch you around, and I'll see you in the next video.